At halftime in the 2005 Champions League final, Liverpool were down 3-0 to AC Milan, one of the greatest club sides ever assembled. The match felt over. Commentators were already discussing how history would remember this as a Milan masterclass. Liverpool's own players walked into their locker room at the break in near silence, staring at a scoreline that felt, by every reasonable measure of football logic, unrecoverable. 6 minutes of second-half football later, the score was tied 3-3. This is the story of the Miracle of Istanbul, widely regarded as the greatest comeback in the history of European football, and the story of how a team that had finished fifth in its own domestic league somehow became champions of Europe on the most improbable night the sport has ever produced. Before we get into the match itself, it's worth understanding just how unlikely Liverpool's presence in this final actually was in the first place. This wasn't a dominant super club walking into a final as overwhelming favorites. Liverpool had finished the 2004 to 2005 Premier League season in fifth place domestically, not even good enough, under normal circumstances, to qualify for the following season's Champions League at all. Their opponents, AC Milan, were widely considered one of the strongest club sides assembled in a generation, stacked with genuine footballing legends across every position on the pitch. By nearly every rational measure, this was a mismatch. What happened over the course of one unforgettable night in Istanbul would go on to defy nearly every one of those expectations, and become the single most legendary match in Champions League history. To understand the Miracle of Istanbul, you have to start with the season that led up to it, because Liverpool's 2004-05 campaign was, by the club's own lofty historical standards, a genuinely turbulent, uneven year. Rafael Benítez had just arrived as Liverpool's new manager that summer, taking charge of a squad in the middle of a significant transition. The club's biggest attacking star, Michael Owen, departed for Real Madrid that same August, fueling widespread expectations across English football that this would be, at best, a season of rebuilding for Liverpool, rather than one of genuine European ambition. Benítez brought in a handful of new signings that summer, including Xabi Alonso and Luis Garcia, both of whom would go on to play absolutely pivotal roles in the European campaign that followed, even as few outside the club anticipated just how significant their contributions would eventually become. Domestically, Liverpool's form throughout the season was, at best, inconsistent, the eventual fifth-place Premier League finish reflecting a team still very much finding its identity under a new manager, rather than a squad operating anywhere near the peak of its capabilities. Liverpool's path to the 2005 Champions League final actually began all the way back in August 2004, with a qualifying round tie against Austrian side Graz AK, which Liverpool navigated by a narrow 2-1 aggregate scoreline, hardly the dominant beginning one might expect from a team destined to become European champions just 9 months later. The group stage that followed brought its own significant challenges. Liverpool's campaign included a tense November fixture away at Deportivo La Coruña, a match that arrived as a genuinely crucial fourth group stage fixture, with the team having collected just 4 points from their opening 3 matches at that stage of the competition, a position that left their advancement into the knockout rounds still very much in doubt. Liverpool ultimately did progress through the group stage and advanced through the knockout rounds that followed, in a campaign that journalists and supporters alike have since described, felt at nearly every stage like a story full of unpredictable highs, lows, and dramatic twists. The kind of season-long narrative arc that, in retrospect, feels almost too dramatically constructed to have actually happened by chance. Standing in Liverpool's way in the final was an AC Milan side that, by nearly universal consensus among football observers at the time, represented one of the most talented squads assembled anywhere in club football during that entire era. Managed by Carlo Ancelotti, Milan's roster that night read like a genuine world all-star selection. Paolo Maldini, one of the greatest defenders in the history of the sport. Andrea Pirlo, orchestrating play from midfield with extraordinary vision and technique. A strike force featuring Andriy Shevchenko and Hernan Crespo, 2 of the most feared forwards in world football at that time. and a squad depth that, position for position, was widely regarded as superior to Liverpool's own lineup across nearly the entire pitch. Liverpool midfielder Dietmar Hamann, reflecting years later on the magnitude of the challenge Milan represented that night, would describe them, without hesitation, as the better side on paper, going as far as suggesting Milan's squad that year could reasonably be considered among the best club teams assembled anywhere in the world across the preceding several decades. This wasn't false modesty. It was, by most objective footballing assessments at the time, simply an accurate read of the gulf in talent and pedigree separating the two finalists. If there was any lingering hope among Liverpool supporters heading into the match that their team might somehow overperform expectations, that hope was dealt an immediate, brutal blow. Paolo Maldini opened the scoring for Milan after just 52 seconds of play, a goal that, remarkably, remains to this day the fastest goal ever scored in a Champions League final. It was as swift and demoralizing a start as any final in the competition's history had ever produced. Milan continued to dominate throughout the remainder of the first half, and just before the interval, Hernan Crespo added 2 further goals in relatively quick succession, extending Milan's advantage to a commanding 3-0 scoreline heading into the break. For Liverpool supporters inside the Ataturk Olympic Stadium, and for millions watching around the world, the match, by any conventional football logic, appeared to be effectively over as a genuine contest. What actually happened inside Liverpool's locker room during that halftime interval has, in the years since, become almost as legendary a part of this story as the second-half comeback itself. Facing a 3-goal deficit against one of the most talented sides in world football, manager Rafael Benítez made a series of tactical adjustments that would prove absolutely decisive in the minutes that followed. Benítez made a significant tactical switch, shifting Liverpool's defensive setup and substituting forward Steve Finnan for midfielder Dietmar Hamann, a change specifically intended to add additional defensive solidity and midfield control against Milan's dominant possession. This adjustment, seemingly modest on paper, would go on to be credited by football analysts and Liverpool's own players in the years since as a genuinely crucial factor in stabilizing the team's shape heading into the second half, creating the platform from which the eventual comeback would be launched. Beyond the tactical adjustments themselves, players have described the atmosphere in the locker room at halftime as one of a team that, despite the seemingly hopeless scoreline, refused to simply accept defeat. A collective determination to at least give themselves a fighting chance in the second half, even if few inside that room could have genuinely believed, at that moment, in the specific, extraordinary events that were about to unfold. What happened next remains, by wide consensus among football historians and journalists, the single most dramatic sustained sequence of play in the history of the Champions League final. In the 54th minute, Liverpool captain Steven Gerrard rose to meet a cross with a powerful glancing header, beating Milan goalkeeper Dida and pulling the score back to 3-1. At the moment it went in, the goal felt, to most observers, like little more than a consolation strike, a moment of pride for Liverpool's captain in what still appeared to be a lost cause, rather than the spark of something far larger. Just 2 minutes later, in the 56th minute, Vladimir Šmicer, playing what would turn out to be his final match for the club before his departure that summer, struck a long-range effort that beat Dida and found the net, pulling Liverpool back to within a single goal at 3-2. Suddenly, something that had felt impossible only minutes earlier began, however improbably, to feel genuinely possible. Then, remarkably, just 3 minutes after that, in the 59th minute, Steven Gerrard was brought down inside Milan's penalty area, and the referee awarded Liverpool a penalty kick. Xabi Alonso stepped up to take it. Dida managed to save Alonso's initial effort, but Alonso reacted first to the rebound, converting from close range to complete an almost unthinkable transformation. In the span of just 6 second-half minutes, Liverpool had drawn level at 3-3, erasing what had appeared to be an insurmountable 3-goal deficit against one of the finest club sides ever assembled. Having produced arguably the most remarkable 6 minutes of football the competition had ever witnessed, Liverpool now faced the considerable remaining challenge of actually seeing the match through to a positive conclusion, first through the remainder of normal time, and then, when the scores remained level at 3-3, through an additional 30 minutes of extra time. Milan, understandably determined not to let their commanding first-half advantage slip away entirely, continued to press for a winning goal throughout the remainder of the match. Liverpool goalkeeper Jerzy Dudek produced a series of crucial saves during this period, most notably an extraordinary double save late in extra time to deny what appeared, in the moment, to be a certain Milan winning goal, a sequence of saves that, in the years since, has become almost as celebrated a part of this story's mythology as the earlier three-goal comeback itself. Neither side was able to find a decisive winning goal across the additional 30 minutes of extra time, meaning the match, level at 3-3, would ultimately be decided by a penalty shootout, a fittingly dramatic conclusion to what was already, by that point in the evening, one of the most extraordinary Champions League finals ever played. The penalty shootout that followed carried its own significant drama. Milan's Serginho missed his opening attempt, saved by Dudek, an early boost for Liverpool's chances. The shootout continued back and forth, with both sides converting several of their subsequent attempts before the decisive moment finally arrived. Andriy Shevchenko, one of the most feared strikers in world football, and the man many observers expected to settle the shootout in Milan's favor, stepped up to take what would prove to be the final kick of the night. Jerzy Dudek produced the decisive save, denying Shevchenko's effort and securing Liverpool's fifth European Cup title, won through one of the most improbable, dramatic sequences of football that the sport's biggest club competition had ever produced. Liverpool had gone from 3-0 down at halftime to champions of Europe, completing what remains, by nearly universal consensus among football historians, journalists, and fans alike, the greatest comeback in Champions League final history. Amid the broader drama of the match itself, one small, charming detail has become part of the Miracle of Istanbul's enduring folklore. Before kickoff, Liverpool's Spanish midfielder Luis Garcia reportedly reminded his teammates of an old, unwritten football superstition, that only the winning team should touch the trophy before the match has actually been decided, out of respect for the game's traditional customs around not tempting fate. As both teams walked out onto the pitch before kickoff, with the trophy positioned prominently between them, Liverpool's players reportedly resisted the temptation to touch it, honoring the superstition Garcia had reminded them of. Two of Milan's own players, Gennaro Gattuso and Kaká, did touch the trophy as they passed by, apparently unaware of, or simply unconcerned by, the superstition. Whether or not this small detail carried any genuine bearing on the outcome that followed is, of course, entirely a matter of football folklore, rather than anything resembling causation. But it's a detail that Liverpool supporters have delighted in retelling ever since, as a charming footnote to an already remarkable night. The celebrations that followed Liverpool's victory, both inside the Ataturk Olympic Stadium and back home on Merseyside, were, by every account, extraordinary in scale and emotional intensity. Liverpool supporters had traveled to Istanbul in enormous numbers, reportedly vastly outnumbering Milan's own traveling contingent inside the stadium, and the scenes of celebration among those fans as Dudek's decisive save secured the shootout victory have become some of the most iconic images in the club's modern history. Back in Liverpool itself, the city erupted in celebration as news of the victory spread. When the triumphant squad returned home in the days that followed, the scenes awaiting them were described by players and staff alike as deeply, personally moving. Supporters ranging from young children to elderly lifelong fans lining the streets, many visibly emotional, marking what was widely understood, even in the immediate aftermath, as one of the most significant nights in the club's long, storied history. Steven Gerrard, reflecting on the aftermath in later interviews, specifically highlighted the emotional scenes among supporters of vastly different ages during the celebrations that followed the team's return home, describing it as one of the most memorable, meaningful aspects of the entire experience for him personally. A reminder that the significance of the achievement extended far beyond the specific footballing details of the match itself, into something that resonated deeply and personally across the club's entire, multi-generational fan base. Part of what makes the Miracle of Istanbul endure so powerfully in football's collective memory isn't simply the scale of the comeback itself, remarkable as it was, but the specific context surrounding it. This wasn't a mid-table club overcoming a mid-table opponent through a fortunate, chaotic match. This was a team that had finished fifth in its own domestic league that season, facing what many considered one of the finest club sides assembled in a generation, and doing so in the biggest possible match, the final of Europe's premier club competition. The specific manner of the comeback, 3 goals scored in a concentrated 6-minute span, following a first-half performance that had appeared to place the outcome entirely beyond doubt, created a narrative arc that felt, to many who witnessed it, almost impossibly dramatic, even by the standards of professional sport, where genuinely stunning comebacks do periodically occur. Football analysts and historians have, in the years since, repeatedly cited the specific concentration and rapidity of Liverpool's scoring during that 6-minute window as a key factor in why this particular comeback has come to be regarded as so uniquely remarkable, even when compared against other celebrated comebacks throughout the broader history of the sport. 2 decades on, the Miracle of Istanbul remains a central, defining part of Liverpool Football Club's modern identity and history, referenced constantly by supporters, pundits, and the broader football media whenever conversations turn to the greatest matches, comebacks, or finals in the sport's history. The 2023 Champions League final was held at the same Ataturk Olympic Stadium in Istanbul, prompting extensive retrospective coverage revisiting the 2005 match and its enduring significance nearly 2 decades after it originally took place. Beyond its significance specifically to Liverpool supporters, the Miracle of Istanbul has become a broader reference point across football culture more generally, frequently cited as the standard against which subsequent dramatic comebacks in various competitions are measured, and regularly featured in retrospective lists, ranking the greatest matches in the sport's history. Rafael Benítez's halftime tactical adjustments in particular have become a frequently studied case study in football coaching and tactical analysis circles, examined as an example of how significant, well-considered tactical changes at a critical moment can meaningfully alter the outcome of a match that, by conventional measures, appeared to be already effectively decided. It's worth spending time on the individual careers this single match helped define, because for several players involved, Istanbul became the defining moment of their entire professional careers, referenced constantly in any discussion of their footballing legacy. Steven Gerrard, already established as one of Liverpool's most important players before that night, saw his reputation elevated to something closer to legendary status, specifically because of his role in Istanbul, his header, his overall performance driving the comeback, and his eventual lifting of the trophy as captain, cemented an association between Gerrard and this specific match that has followed him throughout the remainder of his career and into his post-playing life as a manager and pundit. Jerzy Dudek's career, similarly, is inseparable from his performance that night. A goalkeeper who had, at various points earlier in his Liverpool career, faced significant criticism from sections of the club's own supporters, transformed his standing entirely through his extra-time saves and his decisive penalty stop against Shevchenko. For many Liverpool supporters, Dudek's performance in Istanbul remains the single moment that defines his entire legacy at the club, overshadowing whatever criticism had preceded it. Xabi Alonso, in just his first season at the club following his summer transfer, produced a performance and a decisive penalty conversion that instantly established him as a beloved figure among Liverpool supporters. This reputation would only grow over the remaining years of his tenure at the club, and Vladimir Šmicer's crucial goal, coming in literally his final match for Liverpool before his summer departure, gave a player who might otherwise be remembered as a solid, unspectacular squad contributor a permanent, celebrated place in the club's history instead. It's worth acknowledging, too, just how difficult this result was to process from Milan's perspective, given the scale of what had appeared to be, at halftime, a comprehensive, near-certain victory. Players and staff connected to that Milan squad have, in various interviews conducted in the years since, described the psychological difficulty of processing a result in which their team had objectively outplayed their opponents for large stretches of the match, particularly across the first half, and had built what appeared to be an insurmountable lead, only to see it collapse within the span of a few minutes. Carlo Ancelotti, Milan's manager that night, went on to enjoy a long, decorated career in the years that followed, including eventually winning subsequent Champions League titles with different clubs, but the 2005 final in Istanbul has remained a frequently referenced moment throughout his own managerial career, cited in retrospectives and interviews as one of the most painful, difficult results he experienced across his entire coaching career, precisely because of how dominant his team had appeared before the collapse. For several of Milan's individual players that night, the defeat in Istanbul has similarly remained a frequently discussed, difficult memory throughout their own careers and beyond, a reminder that even matches remembered as legendary triumphs for one side simultaneously represent some of the most painful, difficult losses in the careers of the players on the opposing side, a duality that's often underemphasized in retellings that focus primarily on the celebratory side of the story. Adding a further layer to this story's broader narrative arc, Liverpool and Milan met again in the Champions League final just 2 years later, in 2007, this time in Athens. On that occasion, Milan avenged their earlier defeat, defeating Liverpool 2-1 to reclaim the trophy themselves, with several of the same players from the 2005 final featuring for both sides once again. This rematch has, in the years since, added dimension to how football historians and supporters discuss the broader rivalry and history between these two clubs during this specific era, with the 2005 and 2007 finals often discussed together as bookends of a genuinely significant chapter in Champions League history, involving many of the same key figures on both sides across both matches. For Milan supporters specifically, the 2007 victory has often been discussed, at least in part, as a measure of redemption for the club following the events of 2005. Even as the earlier match's status as one of the greatest comebacks in football history has remained in the broader football world, entirely unaffected by that later result. Here are a few additional details from this story worth knowing. Paolo Maldini's 52-second opening goal remains to this day the fastest goal ever scored in a Champions League final, a record that has stood since 2005, despite numerous subsequent finals played in the years since. Vladimir Šmicer's crucial second-half goal came in what turned out to be his final appearance for Liverpool Football Club, an almost perfectly poetic footballing farewell for a player departing the club that same summer. And Jerzy Dudek's iconic double save late in extra time, denying what appeared to be a certain Milan-winning goal, has since become one of the most replayed, celebrated individual moments connected to the entire match, arguably rivaling even the dramatic 6-minute comeback itself in terms of its lasting place within the match's broader folklore. The Miracle of Istanbul endures in football's collective memory for reasons that extend well beyond the specific tactical or statistical details of the match itself. It represents, in its purest form, one of sport's most powerful and enduring narratives, the idea that no matter how conclusively a contest may appear to be decided, genuine belief, determination, and a handful of pivotal moments can combine to produce outcomes that defy even the most confident predictions. That narrative resonates deeply, not just with dedicated football supporters, but with anyone who has ever faced a situation that seemed, by every reasonable measure, to be already lost. The specific footballing details of Gerrard's header, Šmicer's strike, Alonso's rebound, and Dudek's saves matter enormously to how this story gets told. But the deeper reason it continues to be retold, 2 decades on, is what it represents about resilience and belief in the face of what appeared to be genuinely overwhelming odds. 3 goals down at halftime against one of the greatest club sides ever assembled in the biggest match in club football. And 6 minutes of second-half football later, the impossible had become real. The Miracle of Istanbul remains, by nearly universal consensus, the greatest comeback in the history of the Champions League final, and one of the most extraordinary nights the sport of football has ever produced. 2 decades later, it continues to be told, retold, and celebrated, not just by Liverpool supporters, but across the entire footballing world, as the definitive example of what becomes possible when a team refuses to accept that a match, however conclusively it may appear decided, is truly over until the final whistle actually blows. If this deep dive into football's greatest comeback brought back the magic of that night, or introduced you to it for the first time, make sure to subscribe, because we're covering more of the sport's most legendary matches and moments in the videos ahead. And let us know in the comments, where does the Miracle of Istanbul rank among the greatest comebacks in the history of sport?